Renegade thinkers, chances are most of you have heard of the brand Honeywell. After all, it's been around for 115 years. It's one of the components of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 100 and 500, and it is usually ranked among the Fortune 100 with over 32 billion in annual revenue. But when you start to think about it, you may not know much more than that. And I certainly don't, which is creates a really interesting marketing challenge. What do you do when you have brand recognition, but you don't have as much attached to it, or the way the company has evolved is changed, so everybody knows who you are, and that problem is often associated with the word salience or saliency. And it's as in having a known quality that stands out from its competition. It's not enough that everybody knows your name, although that helps. So on today's show, we're going to explore this challenge with Honeywell's VP of Global Marketing, Joe Toubes. Hey, Joe, welcome. How are you?
I'm well, Drew. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I just realized I meant to ask you, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You pronounced my last name like every teacher did in school my entire life, which is incorrect, but perfectly fine. It's Tobias.
I knew that.
And I never correct it because as long as you're calling my name, I'm all right with it.
All right. Joe Toubes, we've got this. And
all right.
And just in case anybody was wondering, yes, we are recording this live. All right. So you've been at Honeywell for 20 years, which is a long time, but you've just been in the last 2.5, you've been in the hot seat as VP of Global Marketing. What was the situation like when you took on that role?
When I took on the role a few years ago, we were actually just in the midst of going through a transformation you sort of teed up front, Drew, which is how to transform the story of the Honeywell brand. And actually, if you go back, you mentioned I've been with Honeywell 20 years. I've seen that Honeywell brand go through multiple variations over the years. And I think the one that most people remember, Drew, is sort of the thermostat on the wall, right? If they think of Honeywell, in fact, our research shows most people connect it to the thermostat on the wall. Well, you know what? We don't even own the company that makes the thermostat on the wall. We spun it off about 4 years ago. And when I took the role as head of marketing, one of the responsibilities I had was to rethink how we tell our story as a brand and make sure that people don't connect us to just the thermostats that we once invented years ago.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that for a second. So it's so interesting. I mean, I had this conversation probably 3 years ago with Tony Clayton-Hine when she was at Xerox. Yeah. You get well known for something, and it's a good thing because, oh, you work at Honeywell. I know Honeywell, right? But it's a bad thing because you changed in the last 50 years. And I know that there was a Allied Signal merger. Yes. And so, your product lines changed. So talk about, where do you start as you're rethinking your brand? What were the first things that you did?
Yeah, there was two things we did, Drew. One was, as you mentioned, understand what people understand about us, right? And so while they did understand that we were, or thought they understood that we were the thermostat brand, they also understood we were a tech company, a company that was delivering aerospace technologies, technologies for buildings and for distribution centers in the markets that mattered to us, right? Which was actually a bit of a surprise, Drew, because a lot of people would have assumed that you if you're known for one thing, you really don't have that knowledge in others. But they did. The pieces that we also knew, though, Drew, the second piece that we had to understand was what we wanted them to know about where we were going with the brand, right? So they understood what we were, but they didn't understand where we were going, and that's something that that we actually invested the next 2 years of our time starting to build out. And that was positioning us as a tech company.
Right. So let me stop you for a second, because there's a lot of things that I want to break down in this process, and we have time. So to get that first sort of understanding, I'm assuming you did some kind of customer survey. Did you do focus group? What did you do to get this? So your customers, I'm going to assume your customers who are in aerospace knew you're in aerospace, right? So so there's some awareness there. What did you do actually to get that information?
Yeah, we did. We did testing with our not only our current customer base, but also those throughout the industries. We operate in 8 critical verticals. So we did research of our brand in each of those markets, not only understanding whether they knew Honeywell, but what they knew about Honeywell, how they rated us as a brand, how they rated us compared to our peers. And so we really got an in-depth view within each of the industries of what our brand meant and where we kind of stack ranked against peers in each of those key verticals.
I want to stop for a second and just explore the research process in a little more detail, because a lot of new CMOs get in there, want to do this research, find it's really expensive, and you can make mistakes. And so I'm just curious, as you were doing this research, what did you what learned? Were there some mistakes that you learned from?
Yeah, Drew, not ashamed to say I definitely made mistakes along the way. And a couple of the ways that I think I probably could help others who go through this is, that first year, we didn't ask enough of the questions we needed to ask in each of the sectors to create benchmarked data that we could use over and over and over again. And so it took until year 2 and year 3, and perhaps that's how long it does take to really understand your markets. But it took until years 2 and 3 to truly get our benchmarked questions that we now ask year over year over year, and are able to then kind of align it to the success of our brand campaigns to see whether we're impacting it. So our year 1 and 2 definitely are missing probably 2 or 3 of the really critical questions that we now answer and show progress of brand progress.
And that's so interesting to me. And one of the things is, as you take a new job, you get in this role, first 90 days, particularly in a situation where you are trying to change brand and brand understanding, you need to benchmark where you are, right? And you need to have it in a statistically significant sample of your target audience so that you can then come back and say, hey, we made progress. Because these are things that can only be measured in tracking. It's like you can't get there any other way. It might show up in lead generation, it might show up in sales, but it probably won't. It won't show up to the extent, and it's probably a lagging one anyway. So that's great. Thank you. That's a great reminder. Look for those things. Now, I think the harder part here is you needed to sort of do this process to figure out what is it that we did want them to know.
Yes.
And then, so in fairness to you, you don't always know what you don't know. You don't always know what you want to benchmark, because this is the perception that, oh, they know us as a tech company, but they don't know us about this, right? Well,
and actually, Drew, one interesting point, it's sort of related, is that we even had a question about, I don't think it's giving anything away. What is, do you see Honeywell as an IIoT company, right? Which is exactly what we want and believe we are, an industrial Internet of Things company. Well, that term has evolved, and we realized that the statistics were actually more related to who knew what IIoT was more than whether Honeywell was an IIoT. And so you have to be really mindful of language like that, especially in tech that's evolving so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the acronyms that we all sort of take for granted, it may or may not be well known. And yeah, I wouldn't have known what IIoT was. I knew Internet of Things, because I think that's fairly common. But even that, just a reminder as a little, put a bullet, put a punctuation point on this one. When you're doing research, make sure if you have an acronym that you explain what it is. Okay, so you go from year 1 to year 2, you're sort of finding, let's talk about what was the sort of the big aha moment for you during this first, during your, we'll call it your background research phase?
I think the biggest aha moment was how powerful people related to the technology innovations that we have had, and have. Um, we, I think going into it, there was a lot of anecdotal input from our own leadership that we need to kind of reinvent and focus on the future, and just not, kind of disregard what was in the past. And the research just showed how strong our customer base connected to key technologies that we had. And so when we brought that to bear to leadership, not only were they thrilled, of course, it's our company, right? And but it also kind of spurred something that was going to kind of bring to bear in the fruit to bear in the next months ahead, which was we definitely are going to get our employee base very excited if we're able to tell our own story and their story as part of our brand package. And so that was probably the biggest next phase of research. That the research strategy and recommendation was, do not take away what you've done in the past. Use it as ammunition for how you are starting to build your strategy of the future. And so that's kind of what we brought to leadership, and started to build the brand strategy on.
It's so interesting, and it's a tricky one because some people, particularly, I would imagine it sort of varies by age, but a 28-year-old engineer may not give a hoot what you did to build the space shuttle. Right? Or,
Yep.
Or they may or may not. They might think, oh, that's cool, you did that, but what have you done for me lately? Right? So it's an interesting dance, but it is not about just talking about the past. It's connecting the past accomplishment with where you're headed, I think, is what I heard you say.
That's exactly right, Drew. We ended up building a campaign that was doing both of the things that you just talked about. Very, very proud of the fact that we did help the space shuttle fly every single one of its missions. We've been on every mission to the moon that there ever was. But by the way, we also are building all of the technology that's going to get us to Mars, right? And so our campaign is about the fact that our technology has survived all of those things, and is now going to put in the next 20 years somebody into Mars, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I remember I was at an event and I met, this was literally 5 years ago, and I met a young lady who had volunteered to be one of those astronauts. And I believe at the time it was essentially a one-way ticket.
Wow.
Yeah, which I obviously it hasn't, we're still years away from this trip, but man, you imagine the sort of the curiosity, the bravery, and what that kind of, that's an interesting life choice. Anyway, I digress. But I think it's a perfect time for me to digress even further. And I'm going to do a little commercial plug here for CMO Huddles. Launched in 2020, CMO Huddles is an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described Huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment, while another called it a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. If you're a B2B CMO that can share and care with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com or just send me an email and we'll get you a guest pass. All right. So you've done your homework, you've done your research, you sort of think about it. Talk about sort of the internal communication. So you're getting close to what it is, the story that you want to tell. I mean, you're a big company with a lot of employees. They are out there every day. If they don't buy into the brand and so forth, talk a little bit about how you approached employees in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. 100,000 plus employees around the world, Drew, with Honeywell. And the best thing we did in this entire campaign is build our brand campaign with a starting point with employees. They are ambassadors directly with customers and in every region of the globe. And have the best ability to tell our story the way that's necessary. And so our focus of the campaign actually was to not only launch with employees via the natural tactics you do to kind of generate excitement internally and build out programming, but all of the content in year one was employees talking about the technologies that they're supporting. So in essence, we built a program, a campaign that's called "The Future Is What We Make It," and in essence, we put our employees in a position where they were making the future through building technologies and innovating in a bunch of different ways. And so we had 12 different employees from around the world and across each of the verticals and technologies highlighted sort of as our profiles. And we launched each of their campaigns separately in different parts of the world and in different verticals, and started to build a tremendous buzz through that employee base. That kind of pre-launched the overall media campaign by about 2 or 3 weeks.
That's, I mean, it's really cool. I mean, and it works on so many levels. Because obviously, with a line like "The future is what we make it," we can start with employees. Obviously, we hopefully includes your customers, but it also it helps when you have complex technology and you put a face on it and a person and say, "I'm working on this," right. It makes it more tangible.
Absolutely. That was the beauty of it, right? One of the you hit it, you actually hit it exactly right, Drew. One of the things that research talked about was that you're in technology that I'm not 100% sure I understand. And we really needed to bring it up. We're not the first ones in B2B space to have to sort of realize that we're one level deeper in the technology supply chain than people understand. So a lot of the discussions we had was about, for instance, one of our employees said, "I'm letting people breathe on Mars," right? And so the idea was they're doing this unbelievable thing, and it's a person. It's Honeywell's people connecting with our customers that are doing these amazing things. And obviously, as just an example, one of the more extraordinary examples of ways that we did it. And by the way, she is building technology so that volunteer who is going to Mars actually makes it back to Earth, because the goal in fact is to get them back to Earth.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. I was making perhaps giving her more heroicism than.
Well, it's possible that she really was on a one-way mission, but I think they figured it out now.
So I wonder if you could give another example of this. So how did you pick these employees? What was sort of the process that you went through? I'm imagining you're looking for diversity on all levels.
Correct. We were looking for diversity. Yes, obviously in diversity of verticals and geographies, age, was a critical one, gender and ethnicity. But we were also looking at a diversity of types of technologies that we were involved in: software, mechanical, chemical. You'd be surprised at the diversity of technologies that Honeywell has, and so we needed to make sure that it was touching each of these things, all with the commonality that they are innovating technology, future shaping each of the industries that they're in. One of the other things, Drew, and you mentioned diversity. One of the other things that we as a brand, not unlike a lot of B2B companies, were trying to do is also make sure that we are positioning ourselves to recruit the employee of the future. And part of this brand campaign's goals is just that, right? We are more and more a software company. And so we are going after that software technologist that is so in demand right now across so many industries. And we know that they're looking to be in a company that's exciting, that's a company made up of people that look like them, that's excited about technologies like them. And so yeah, a lot of the campaign aimed at the recruitment side of things as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a conversation that's been coming up. In fact, we spent the whole month of June in CMO huddles talking about the challenges of recruiting and retention. And of the folks that showed up this month, every single one of them, when I asked how many of you have lost employees, everyone raised their hand. How many of you had open spots? Every one of them raised their hands. And also, how many of you are sort of looking at your employer brand differently right now? Because there is a extreme talent shortage, particularly in tech and developing. So you do, this is where where we started the conversation. Awareness is good. Yeah, I've heard of Honeywell. I'm not sure what, but having some attachment, some salience is really, really important in that, not just for customers, but you're really selling an idea to employees who are your future. So, and showcasing employees is obviously a good way to do that. So let me ask you this. So we've worked over the years with employees to try to get them on camera, and not every employee is, even though they could be really good at their technology, is good on camera. What did you have any that you tried that just couldn't do it?
Of course. I think we actually started with employees who didn't want to do it, despite having everything you would want from them, right? They looked great. You knew they were a good presenter or speaker in the past. They have amazing stories to tell. They just had no interest in doing it. The second, Drew, as you mentioned, is people who couldn't do it. I think we brought to our shoot that first year 15 employees, and 12 made it onto something. We had, some reasons why one or two didn't do it. And then, one froze. I won't go into detail on it, but one just absolutely froze on set. They just completely froze. We tried very hard. Our agency tried very hard to kind of get different pieces of it to work, and it just didn't.
Yeah,
it just did not.
And so, but the good news, I guess, all of this work, it sounds like you did before the pandemic.
Oh yeah, Drew. This was late 2000. No. This was early 2019.
Okay.
That
so
came out.
let's sort of fast forward. You do the employee launch, and then what were some of the key parts of the sort of, we'll call it, customer and broader launch with media support? What was the timing on that?
Yeah, so probably a couple of weeks later, we launched through social and digital, and also did customer events with some of the key customers who were kind of helped featured in the program, so that they could kind of be a part of it. we have some pretty big customers, as you could imagine, in some of the industrial space we have, and so very excited to be a part of the program and to be part of the outreach. And then 2 weeks, probably a month later, Drew, we launched our TV spots that ran for about 4 months, and that obviously pushed us to a pretty significant level. That was all in the U.S.
Right.
In that first 4 months. What followed then was we launched in China about 3 months later with a pretty significant digital only program, and then did a similar one 3 months after that in the Middle East in English and Arabic, with a similar campaign. And so we were running U.S., China, Middle East for about 9 months in 2019.
Okay. So now it's 2020, it's March. And the thing you use the term customer events. Remember those? And being able to shoot in person. So March 2020 comes along. I am imagining that you are a company, you and I talked about this, that was heavily dependent on physical events as a source of leads. Let's talk about your pandemic pivot.
Yeah, the pandemic pivot was rapid. We were quick to come together as a marketing organization and understand what we had in store, starting with events, of course. As you mentioned, there are several in-person events that we deem really critical, mostly our user group events that we have across a number of our industries. Which obviously were not going to happen. We quickly canceled those, but there was quite a few events that we either canceled or were canceled on us, as everybody else was, that probably within the second week of March. The good news is our team in China sort of gave us a blueprint for how to make the shift, because in January they were shut down,
right,
and started to do virtual events. And so we had our global teams on with our China counterparts, understanding what they were getting, the kind of return, what it might look like. And so when March came around, we actually were able to flip the switch in most regards and identify which of the events that we were going to could be duplicated, replicated, or at least attempted in a virtual environment. So we made a pretty quick pivot, albeit a little bumpy along the way in terms of how quickly our teams could implement all of these programs.
So, all right, we're now in an optimistic U.S. situation with things are opening up. Let's talk about 2021. Where, how has your marketing evolved? What you're doing? What's news? What have you learned? Pick one.
Yeah. Obviously, optimistic is exactly how I would put it. We're making a shift back to a little bit of to the norm in the U.S. For the second half of the year. We have several in-person events going back on the books, albeit definitely hybrid type events where they're creating a little bit of a virtual extension. Even to predominantly physical events like our user groups. We're also seeing continuation of virtual events, but I'm not sure if my CMOs in other businesses would agree. There's an exhaustion, I think, right now from virtual events that I think probably deserves a break for a few months and maybe we'll come back. I believe it's not going anywhere. I just think it needs a break. People are just tired of sitting on a Zoom or whatever for too long. But I do think that there's tremendous value, if for no other reason, the reach that we've been able to get through virtual events is really something that can't be missed. So we continue to do virtual events. We have a premier a tech event that we're doing that's been primarily virtual. We're going to keep it at least partially virtual going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, we've been talking a lot about webinar fatigue, and it is, even if the numbers are there, the lead quality has dropped almost across the board. And unless you're continuing to raise the bar and doing something unique and bringing a reason, why is this live, really emphasizing that, and that there's some reason, because otherwise people, you're competing with email and text and Slack, and it's really gotten hard. And you're right about the screen fatigue. So it is going to be fascinating what happens in the next 6 months. And it's so difficult because it's, if you're a global company like yeah, the US is ready to go back to physical and there's a great pent-up demand, but in Europe and other countries, it's still, it's still, still in lockdown in some places. So, absolutely. But I want to sort of, as you started on this journey 2.5 years ago. I want to get to, what would you say are sort of when you look at the progress that you've made, what would you point to as, have you did the benchmarks? Are you seeing movement? What's been good? Defend yourself. Give me the sort of KPIs that you felt you've moved the needle on.
Yeah. We looked at a number of KPI and have seen progress across the board. Number one, in terms of brand familiarity, the numbers have gone up significantly each year. Actually, the biggest increase was year one, not surprisingly, but we continue to go up in year two and year three. The 2 or 3 of the things that we most focus on are, Honeywell as a tech company and as a software company. We've seen double-digit increases since the campaign started. We have seen on the recruitment side, we've seen increased percentage of recruitment come through branded programming that we've built in. In fact, I've hired within my own marketing organization a recruitment marketer to make sure that brand is aligned to it. And so we've seen tremendous improvement there. We've also seen engagement, Honeywell employee engagement increases. Pride in your company, and those types of data points that have, while can't necessarily take full credit from a brand campaign standpoint, I certainly think that it aligns at least partially to it. So
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I really, I'm a little bit of a broken record on this show, but I really truly believe, and I write a lot about it, if have sort of a three-legged stool, if they have metrics for employees, if they have metrics for sort of customers and brand, and then they have metrics for related to acquisition and velocity, then you've got these 3 sort of things that you can lean on that all matter and all combine to the success of the company, right? And so often the metrics that we talk about on this show is just, yeah, our lead, we tripled our lead count, or yeah, our pipeline, I moved the pipeline from 30% to 40% marketing, certified that they touched it. And if you don't have that employee part, there's something that's missing, because the brand and the brand work that you're doing has such a big impact on it. Okay, so I'm done preaching on that. We have an employee metric. You've talked about brand-related, brand health metrics like familiarity and understanding. Yeah. What about when it comes to sort of, Hey, how you driving revenue? What's what do you point to and sort of live by for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we have a pretty healthy program that measures demand and lead generation through marketing channels, and we've seen significant double-digit increases year over year in both pipeline and marketing-based revenue. Um, the interesting thing there is I kind of look at it, and I'm happy both ways, but I kind of look at it that it's a combination of better brand, better marketing that's helping us through it too, right? It's not just the fact that the brand itself is sort of driving this, but I think we're also building better campaigns, we're delivering it better, we're targeting it and segmenting our audience better. But in the end, it's delivering for the business what's necessary.
So, okay, so as we wrap this up and think about some of the biggest lessons learned, um, your current self, 2.5 years, gets to go back and advise when you first started on
Mm.
this thing. What advice would you would you now be able to give your earlier self?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would tell myself 3 years earlier that expect to make mistakes. That there is no way to get it all right on the way there. And we highlighted at the beginning of this conversation a couple of the mistakes, and in many ways, though, those are kind of the learnings that those are the rich learnings that you need. But when they happen, Drew, they sure don't feel that way. And so I think I would tell myself to give myself a little bit of a break along the way. It's going to work out. Um, I don't know if I would accept my own advice. I'll be honest, but that's probably one that CMOs should probably give themselves if they possibly can.
Yeah, CMOs are not very good at cutting
No,
themselves slack. They really, really
no,
aren't. But nor are their bosses.
no. I get it. I get it.
Okay, so but we're gonna cut them some slack. And then okay, I'm then lastly, what's on the horizon for you?
For us at Honeywell, I think that the next phase for us is really how to bring the brand to the next level. I think that some of our growth in new markets, both geographic markets, as well as new industries, will create new challenges for us. Telling our story in a market that doesn't recognize us, like healthcare, or in markets that we're not seen as such a big brand in some parts of the world, will create new opportunities, exciting ones, I think. The second thing is, how else to utilize media and to kind of promote sponsorships and partnerships that we haven't really tapped into in the past, and we're exploring each of those as well. So
Right.
those are kind of two of the different angles that we're aiming towards.
Interesting. One of the things that I realized that I just sort of completely skipped over, you did use the word television,
Yeah.
that you were doing paid TV ads. A lot of folks listening will either be A, jealous, or B, going, what? Digital age? How could you be using television? First of all, and yet I know a number of brands that are obviously are using television, B2B brands that are using television to
Mhm.
great effect. Uh, did you have any trouble selling in television advertising internally?
No, no. In fact, uh, it came from leadership, that they thought it was an opportunity to kind of amplify what we were doing strategically in the digital space. And we happen to know anecdotally that the feedback to our C-suite was very strong through the TV.
And what specifically did you? Where did these ads run? What was your buy like?
That it was mostly a mix of financial, like CNBC, Bloomberg TV, but also ESPN and a number of sports, MLB Network. There was obviously a target, 35 to 49. Think C-suite that we were aiming at.
Right. And what's so interesting about that, and for public companies, particularly ones that have been around as long as Honeywell, there is that benefit as well. I mean, and there's just inarguable that when you're running those financial news, that helps that industry stay. You're keeping investor top of mind too. And even if
not an insignificant target for us, you're right.
And it matters. I mean, I know that was, GE for years was on television because it was the largest held stock in the country.
Yep.
So, of course, you could say that they may not be selling a windmill through it, a turbine or something, or a giant jet engine, but their stock that matters. So that's interesting. All right. Very good. Joe, this has been, it's such an interesting journey that you've been through and where you're going, and what an interesting time, because you had the good fortune of getting this campaign out there before COVID, and then made the adjustments. There are a few things that I'm going to sort of summarize quickly that I think are so interesting here. You got to do your homework and make sure you understand your target really well and understand what that baseline of understanding is, right? We need to know what problem we're trying to solve. And in this case I've heard of Honeywell, but I don't know enough about them to make an intelligent decision or recommend. And so I need this deeper level of understanding. So phase one, starting with employees, telling the story is so interesting because it does a number of things. It's great for your employees because they say, oh, that's me. Oh, look, that's kind of cool. Two, there's something sort of more real about an employee talking about something than just this sort of third-party voice over typical B2B commercial. So there's some credibility there that goes with it. And then launching that campaign. And I do like the language. The future is what we make it. So this is a 150-year-old company whose first word in their tagline is future. Interesting. What we make it, in that it's sort of almost like an ingredient brand. And that's what you're selling. So I just connected a lot of dots for you there. If you've got a brand that's well known, you still got to do a lot of work to make sure that it's known beyond just the word. All right, Joe, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, Drew, thank you so much for having me.
Renegade Thinkers Unite. Oh, by the way, if you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, go onto your favorite podcast channel and give us a 6-star. All right, we'll take a 5-star review because nobody takes 6 stars. Or share it with a friend. We really appreciate sharing is caring. Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Hey, that's me. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about the savviest B2B marketing boutique in New York City, visit renegade.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.